Yesterday morning, I'm sitting right here on this very couch, drinking coffee, reading, and I get a call, get another call, two, three, four calls. I'm thinking, I don't want to answer the phone right now, but I go, who's calling me, back to back four times? I go to the phone, I see it's the bank calling, right? It comes up on the caller ID as the bank that I used. I say, what are they calling? So I pick up the phone. Hi, this is Dan Parker from your bank. And he's on here saying that there's a pending fraud charge for $3,500, and that all this stuff to resolve it that I have to do. And he goes, did you authorize this charge? And again, it comes up on the caller ID as the bank that I use. I have it saved in my phone. And I pause for a second and I go, no. And he goes on to say that, well, in order to reverse this charge and look into this, I need you to log into your online banking. I'm not going to ask you for any personal information. So I'm already aware that it could potentially be a scam, but I'm, trying to see, okay, well, where is this leading? And I log in, and he proceeds to say, okay, I'm going to need you to do this, and I'm going to need you to do this. And luckily, I'm aware of these scams. There's a great channel I recommend checking out on YouTube. Huge channel. It's got probably 4 million subscribers, called Scammer Payback. And I had listened to a lot of their videos and watched how this guy basically trolls scammers and plays dumb, and then kind of flips the tables on them, and then they end up getting super angry and cussing him out and swearing, all this stuff. And the bottom line about this is just what a serious issue it is right now in America and in the world, of how many innocent people, right? We're going about our lives, working, paying the bills. We're not thinking about it. And there's people that spend all their time trying to figure out how to steal working people's money, everybody's money, right? Because most people, we think, oh yeah, well, I would never think of doing that. But people they have whole call centers dedicated to scamming people. So anyway, back to this particular story from yesterday. So I'm on the phone with him, and he's going, well, I'm going to need you to do this, I'm going to need you to do this, but since I was aware of it, having checked out this channel and also having some pretty bad experiences with things like this before, I said, okay, well, hold on a second. Why don't you tell me all the step-by-step breakdown first of what you're going to ask me to do before I just comply with every single thing you're saying, as you are saying you are somebody who works for the bank. Tell me the step-by-step and the end goal and result to prevent this fraud charge that you are claiming is pending on my account. And again, the biggest thing here was that they had the phone number of the bank, right? So, and he was a little resistant. You could hear him start to get angry for a second and go, but then he calmed down. And so again, could have been a red flag, but at the same time, you could be on the phone with the bank and you might ask them for something, and if the person's having a bad day or something, they're not in a good mood, they might give you a little bit of attitude. So again, he regained his composure, and he said, okay, well, and he listed the things. I'm going to need you to go to Zelle. I'm going to need you to put in this amount and put in your name, because we're going to send the payment back to you. Anyway, he listed the thing, and I listened, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And then he gets a little bit flustered again, but he's kind of, controlling himself. You could tell he was starting to get angry, and he said, well, why would you ask me to tell you what the process is if you're not going to do it? And I said, well, because you sound like a scammer, right? And I said, I'm not doing that. And then he starts cussing me out, swearing, and then at that moment I said, oh, so you're a criminal. Got it. You're a scammer, you're a criminal, you're trying to steal my money. So it goes back and forth, and it just unbelievable how somebody, when they realize that you're onto them, they lose their temper, and he ends up hanging up the phone. But the bigger thing about this is that this is a story that's not even about me. It's about how I can't stand how widespread this is, and how many people are getting ripped off, and most of all, people that are least able to sustain a loss of that kind for a scam. For example, older people. For example, people that are on unemployment, people that are on disability, and somebody coming along and trying to steal $3,500, saying it's to keep them safe from having $3,500 stolen. In other words, it's this crazy game that they play. That they lead you down the garden path and make you think it's legitimate, and then they steal your money. And it's just, and again, that channel Scammer Payback is a great channel, because the whole premise of that channel is he's basically doing investigative things on these call centers that may be here in the U.S. They may be, a lot of them are in India, a lot of them are abroad, and he exposes them for what they're doing, and just how despicable this is. It's just something that I think people need to be very aware of. And another thing, let me just say too, right? I heard, oh, on the radio they're talking about, protect your data, because there's scammers out there. But again, anything that you hear on the mainstream media channels is often, by the time you hear it, they're 2 years behind. They're 3 years, behind. Protect your data. They have the data. They've stolen the data. How would they have your phone number and the ability to match your phone number with what bank you use? In other words, they pre-qualify the victims of these scams by having enough data to be able to pose as the people working for these banking institutions, right? So then next, I call the bank. And I say, just to let, it was more of courtesy, because he wasn't able to steal any money, and it was a courtesy to them to say, hey, by the way, you have scammers with your phone number, your corporate phone number, and that comes up on the caller ID as your number, because I had the number saved in my phone, right? And so the lady on the phone didn't really know what was going on. She said, okay, let me put you on hold and go over to the fraud department and talk to them, right? So she puts me on hold. She comes back and she goes, yeah, I talked to the fraud department. They're saying this has been happening pretty often. And I said, well, yeah, it makes sense. But that they're getting calls constantly, that people are calling with the bank's phone number. So there's obviously, and you may be aware of this, I guess I maybe had heard of it, but I wasn't aware of how effective it was when somebody calls with a caller ID, because they've hijacked that phone number somehow with some electronic means from their call center. And anyway, I talked for a little bit with the bank and said, yeah, something to be aware of. And I just think it's again, it's so incredible that at this point, with how prosperous society is, you have this other, and you have economic problems, you have things falling apart at the seams a lot with the supply chain, but you also have, a level of prosperity that is pretty unprecedented in human history, and you have entire call centers of people that literally all they do is just call people and steal money from people, right? And they victimize people who actually work for that money, and then all of a sudden $3,500 is just gone. And you thought it was to reverse a wire fraud charge, or to reverse a pending credit card charge that they were saying was happening, and then they just stole your money. And another very interesting thing that the lady said on the phone was that this is something that has been happening a lot more since the pandemic, right? So ever since early 2020, this type of activity has skyrocketed, because people in that period have transitioned to becoming more reliant on technology. And in the beginning, necessarily so, people were working from home, people were being accustomed to working from Zoom. They were conducting business by phone as opposed to in person, as opposed to going to meetings. They were doing it by phone, right? So the phone has become even more of an important tool in modern society, but in a way to a lopsided extent ever since the pandemic. So that was an interesting dynamic that I had never heard from the bank, that for them to say, yeah, it has gotten worse since 2020, basically. And the last thing I want to wrap this up with is that how have we come to a point in society where there's so many people that think that this is that can actually live with themselves, that doing this to people again. I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but I know that the difference between overt crime, where somebody would have to actually physically rob someone, the difference is there's a lot more risk involved in that, right? There's a million ways that could go wrong, right? There's so much more that could go wrong in a physical robbery where somebody's trying to steal something physical from somebody. Whereas using technology, using a phone, people can call posing as a financial institution, posing as somebody who's helping to solve a problem that doesn't even exist, but they convince you that it exists to then steal. So I just think it's a moral issue. It's a depravity in our society. Something that's been happening more and more. Even on mainstream channels, they're admitting that this is happening a lot. And I just think it's something that needs to have more attention, needs to be brought to it. Number one, so that people can be aware of it. From a technical perspective, obviously, to know, okay, these are the characteristics of a scam, these are the methods that scammers use, but also on a grander scale, so that we can actually take a step back and take a look at our society, our world, and what's going on in the world, what's going on in America, where this has become so widespread, right? That these and just that these people prey on people with such impunity also, right? Because when they're doing this over the phone, I mean, you can file a police report, but that number that they call from, in this case, obviously they use some computer manipulation to get that number, but it could be some other random number, and then they just go and change those numbers, right? So again, something to look at, something to reflect on, something to be aware of, something to be careful of, because again, in these where there's arguments of whether we're in a recession or not. I mean, come on, wasn't the historical and the established definition of a recession 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth? Yes, but all of a sudden they're saying, oh no, but we changed the definition. Okay, that's great. That's all great. But the reality is, credit card debt is out of control. Consumer debt is out of control because people are having to take on debt to pay for basic consumer staples, right? To pay for food for their families, to pay for gas for their families. And at a time with worsening economic conditions, where it's becoming increasingly difficult for the average person to get by, let alone if they have a family to support, if they, 1 kid, 2 kids, 3 kids or more, and yet you have people that literally all they do is call people and try to steal money from them. So something to look at, something to reflect on, and this was kind of the topic of this newsletter that I started this year in 2022 called a Sign of the Times Brief. And I typically write articles, but I wanted to just make a video about this because it just happened yesterday, and I was like, well, what better way to communicate it? And until the next video, it'll be on a different topic, but this struck me as something that was very important. So until next time.